Well, welcome to today's webinar, right? So that's our October webinar, almost the last day of October, also the last day of the summertime. So things have to move back by 1 hour tomorrow, I assume, right? So look, today's subject, as far as I recall it, if I recall it correctly, that would be the hand, arm, and everything that has to do with the upper extremity.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so that's good to hear, so that I am not confused there. And of course, this is a very large and ambitious topic with a number of different aspects to it. And since it's an ambitious thing overall, so I also try to kind of maybe make a bit of the over ambitious approach, but we'll see how well I'm going to manage with combination of the like anatomical drawings and their illustrations, right? So you see the live photo and video illustrations. So let's have a look. So first point, let's start with something more familiar, right? So, okay. All right, so we are here in the sharing mode, right? So you see I've chosen here this kind of optimistic, powerful, muscular drawing so that you get this as their image of how the things are looking in the healthy individual. But at the same time, this picture is also giving us two sort of important lines of thinking. So one, it immediately introduces the idea of the Cubital Fossa, right? So you see something which the term that you wouldn't be using in the everyday language. So obviously that's not, if you look at your arm, you're going to see the Cubital Fossa, but this is not what you would be actually using as a part of the everyday language, right? And the second thing that you see here is the Brachioradialis Muscle. So again, this is supposed to give us a little bit of preparation and kind of the taste for what we want to look at, because the brachioradialis is an essential muscle where we want to know the way how it works and how it bridges, because that's the muscle that actually bridges from the forearm to the upper arm. And this is the muscle which is also very much integrated into the sort of skin fat component. So that's why overall, for the children with their like movement disabilities, this brachioradialis plays a very important role, so that you want to understand how this entire thing works and what sort of contribution it makes, right? So that's just a first taste of the things that we want to discuss. But then I was a little bit like, okay, what do I start with, right? Because typically, what you would expect some conversation that would start with the discussion of, okay, this is the so-called normal movement, this is the full range, and that's how the restrictions emerge, and so on and so on. But I don't think that that is actually informative for you, right? So in that sense, even looking at this arm, right, so you see with this kind of muscular, power, bodybuilder sort of thing, doesn't really bring much recognition, saying like, how does that relate to my child, right? So that's why what I thought about is that maybe we should start the things a little bit differently. So, and we will really start them, what I've done in the previous webinar with the foot, when we're going to look at some sort of transitions for the areas which are complex and stubborn and difficult to get the response from. And then we would sort of use that as their opportunity to understand how the things are working. And because basically this is what you want for your children, right? To get out of those locks. But at the same time, when it comes to those locks, you have three types of those big challenges, right? So where they would be respectively, one type of the challenge would be the shoulder girdle and the pectorals. So then the other one would be the elbow, and the third one would be the actual wrist, and then the transition to the hands. So all of them, they look different. And at the same time, you know, it's kind of a question mark from which to start from. So we can start from anything, and let's start from the commonality. And the commonality there is their conversation about the shoulder girdle, right? So the conversation about their shoulder blades and their positioning and how the entire shoulder girdle works. So in fact, I would deliberately bring your attention first and foremost to the back, to the shoulder blades and their integration. So whilst you're being fresh, I will then give you this drawing. So this drawing is very simple. It's the view from the top. And that drawing refers us back to our most popular picture that we are using throughout all the webinars, right? So for those who watched any of our webinars should have been familiar with this picture, right? So you see this fundamental cross-sectional view, the relationship between the ventral and the dorsal. So if you thought that the conversation about the arms would exclude this, you know, this portion, you would be, of course, mistaken. So once again, I want to remind this basic fundamental thing, that when it comes to the child's development, all of us, we are born with a relatively weak dorsal part, right? So everything at the back here, that's the dorsal part, because there's no real opportunity to develop the dorsal part when the child is in utero. There's just, everything is too uniform, the child is just too nicely kind of folded over there and floating to get this. So when we are born, we are ventral. And at this initial entry into the world of the unfriendly Mother Earth, so which presents their challenging surrounding gaseous atmosphere that on the one hand wants to squash you, on the other hand kind of wants to tear you apart, on the third hand you have to extract the gases from it, and on the fourth hand you have to get them, you know, let's say get them out into it. So you have to breathe against that, plus you have to breathe against your own weight. So in this beginning, your ventral part does both things. It does the metabolic job and it does the postural job, right? Postural, metabolic. But as it does so, through the mechanics of breathing and so on, what do we want? We want to get to the point that as much as possible, as soon as possible, the postural job would be shifted to the dorsal elements. That's the number one thing, dorsal shift. So that by the time that the child is, say, 1 year old and expected to get the walking and so on, so that your ventral part is primarily metabolic, that it's already being kind of secondary and integrated into the dorsal part, right? So that's the key message that kind of runs as a red herring, as a thread throughout the entire development. So that's why everything that we face in the children with any kind of developmental challenges always presents some sort of their dorsal deficit. And I must say that I'm very proud that lately I have found that nice image of the visualization of the shoulder blades as the glass holder. Wait a second. Yeah, here we are, right? So I'm very happy with this idea, you know, with this visualization, because it's really, really, really powerful. Because when you look at the shoulder blades, you sort of have this, idea. What is it? How is it working? What is this strange thing, which is kind of triangular stuff that is floating there at the back, and so on and so forth. The moment you get this image of the glass holder suction cups, everything becomes crystal clear. So that's kind of your ultimate extra dorsalization, right? So you see, on the one hand, you have to dorsalize via the spine. On the other hand, you have to dorsalize via your maximum depth, which is counted in respect to the head, right? So you see, and that's why look at the shoulder blades as those suction cups that if you get back to this image, right? So what does it mean? That means that you want those suction cups to be as deep as possible, right? So you see that they would be there as deep as possible so that they will really suck everything into them. The entire torso would be sucked into them. So that's the critical thing. And then counting from the neck, that is going to give you the right kind of depth. So why am I zooming so much on this point? Because here we come to a very important trick that you have to be able to see in your child. And that trick relates to their fundamental relationship between the head, neck, and the arms, right? So one more kind of thread that runs through our entire sequence of webinars is this thing, that the key element of the neck is the nuchal ligament, right? So you see, that's the deepest structure which actually organizes and so on. And if we look at it fundamentally, at a kind of closer view, we are going to see this, right? So it's kind of maybe not so obvious, but that's a kind of a zoom at the ligament, right? So you see, and we can see several arrangements that are running within that ligament. That's the ligament which controls the flexion of the head, and that's the true neck. Muscles are overlapping, and the main muscles, like the trapezius, what are they doing? They are connecting the arms to the head, right? So you see, it's not the first time I mention it, but that's important thing to remember. Now, even when it comes to this thing, shoulder girdle, trapezius being the direct link from the arms to the head, I want you to keep an eye on this line that I'm drawing here. Because you see what is so tricky about the neck and the shoulder girdle, that it has the depth, but this depth runs in latitudes, right? So you see, if you were to look at kind of Mother Earth this way, you would see that the latitudes they run, and the whole thing gets the total perimeter increases, right? So the equator, it's the widest, at the pole, it's the narrowest. But you can't really see this gradient. So it's like not presented in terms of the visible steps. It's not like a terrace, right? So, but this is the essential thing, that once we understand the dorsalization, the shoulder blades represent the greatest possible depth of the body. So that's the one that's the most depth, the girth, whichever way you want to put it. So that means that what we want from the trapezius is to be planted and hooked and rooted at the shoulder blades, at the depth. So that's why this picture is very useful. So because that's a top view, and that tells you, this is how this whole thing is supposed to work, right? You're supposed to see the attachment of the trapezius, because that's the most visible muscle, right? The attachment of the trapezius has to run where? On the top of the shoulder blades. That would be the dorsalization. But what do we observe in the reality of the children with cerebral palsy most often? First thing that we observe is the disruption. this connection, the so-called acromioclavicular junction, it's disrupted. It's literally like you'll see that the ligament that sort of which saws it together, this ligament is literally so weak that they are split. And the second thing we would see is that the curtain of the trapezius is entirely hooked onto their clavicle. So effectively, what does it mean? It means that your child becomes like a half-bodied person. So the entire back, everything dorsal just disappears. So all of the force lines and so on, they just, like literally it's just a person who's been cut through. So now, once I tried to plant this image into you, so let's kind of look at the example so that you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so you see that's a kind of typical picture, right? Where you see the slippery shoulder blades and it's not very clear what's happening, right? So, but when it's not very clear what's happening, the answer something wrong is happening, right? So that's very, very simple. So that means that here you can see everything is being blended. So that is already the illustration of the situation where you have it connected via the clavicle. But of course, you might say, well, that's not very convincing, Mr. Blyum. We don't see the clavicle here. Can you show us some of those clavicles? And my answer would be, of course, I can show you some of those clavicles. And here is a great example. See, that's example which is already quite advanced in transition. So that's the girl who's been, through ABR already for several years. And you can see this is a very beautiful transition here. My finger indicates this gap between the clavicle and the shoulder blade. And what you are seeing here, you are seeing this line, right? You're seeing this line of the trapezius being entirely connected to the clavicle, right? So you see, if we move it towards this picture, what does it mean? That means that for her, indeed, that's the situation. So her entire connection works only through the clavicle, but the clavicle, where does it belong? Does it belong to the dorsal part? No, right? So the clavicle is ventral. The clavicle belongs to the front. So as no matter how deep or how shallow your child is looking, that doesn't matter. What matters is where are the neck connections. So if you count the depth from the head, right? So you see the true depth has to be dorsal. That means that the head has to be then connected dorsally to the shoulder girdle. So that's the key point. So therefore, what is our biggest kind of workload? What do we want to gain? We want to gain this depth so that those trapezius, they would leave their clavicles and gradually shift towards their so that they would root themselves on top of their shoulder blades. That's the key, right? So you see, that's the strongest image that you have to get, rooting them on top of the shoulder blades. If you don't have this, you are not going to have anything good with the arm. You can stretch it, you can fight it, you can try to teach the child whatever and so on. Nothing good is going to happen within this arm because this arm is not rooted deep enough. It's a half-body person. So therefore, in that sense, the priority of developing this depth is the key. But now, once we talk about this depth, you also see that this depth is not just flat, it also has its own shape. And that's another important point, that within this shape, you want to see the development of the specifics. Each of them have to, the shoulder blades, they have to roll into the back, right? Not just slide into them, they have to roll. It has to be like this gear wheel connection there. And of course, that also implies the activation of the joints connecting the ribs to the shoulder, to the vertebral column. Of course, it implies the depth of the ligaments of the vertebral column. But the key image now, I'm just trying not to over clog it for you, is this transition. So if we get back to this image, to this girl that we're seeing here, so what would be the mega important advantage for her, right? Is to get more of the shoulder blade depth. So this depth has to increase as much as possible, right? That would be the suction cups, which are bringing the torso with it. And this line of the actual clavicles, you know, this line of the, trapezius, have to merge more and more and root within that growing depth of the shoulder blade. And this string has to discharge. So that's really the big image that you want to have. So this string has to disappear. And as it disappears, it has to dissolve from this single line. See this single line, which has this kind of like this curve, it has to then split. So then you would see here the vertical neck, and in respect to the neck, the kind of the horizontal shoulder blade. So that would be the T, kind of the T-shape looking thing, which then would get this curvature. So that's the critical thing that you want to see as the transition over there. So now let's have a look at some other examples to kind of make this lesson stick. So of course, when I'm looking at this girl, what else am I looking at, right? I'm also looking at another important sign that indicates the depth of the shoulder girdle, right? So as we understood it here, remember? So we want their depth so that they have to, from overlapping the neck, they have to slide down, open the neck, and then, you know, we have to see this maximum depth here. So that you see here, this is the shoulder blade, which is kind of partially still stuck in between. So here you want to have the line, right? So you see, draw the latitude and draw the latitude, right? So you see the shoulder blades have to belong to this curvature. They have no business being over the neck territory. They should not be there. So that the neck territory itself has to be open as a latitude. And this is one of the amazing things that actually happens to the ABR process, that when we see that the channel, then like the shoulder blades, they could be really gliding and very unstable in respect to the spine, you know, like laterally they glide, but they don't slide onto the top. So that's an amazing property that we are looking, you know, forwards to. And for you to kind of increase the number of recognitions, so you see, look at this. So this is the kid who is more powerful in general than the previous girl. But for him, you can see that the shoulder blades are very deeply sort of sunk, and he is the one who still would be using their clavicle as his kind of main stability factor. But for him, the total kind of chunk and merge is better. So, and for him, that's where you can see the presence of this Y shape, right? So you see this Y shape appearance. This is the good thing. So that means that it's moving from the clavicles to the shoulder blades. And then, of course, if we look at the poor things, which are not looking good, so then we are bringing ourselves back here. As you can see here, that's a good one, right? So you see here, you are seeing a nice transition. So this is the person who has quite powerful shoulder blades. So this is the best out of, see, smaller than the previous individual, right? So you see this guy is obviously bigger, but you can see that his shoulder blades sink. So if they sink, that means that they're not dorsal enough. And if we look at this boy, so that's good positioning of the shoulder blades. This is the positioning which you want to see. You want to see this situation, and also note the fact that as he is putting the weight from the bottom, the shoulder blades, they are not sliding to the top, they're staying. But what is their shape that they are following? See, they are following this exact shape. So they are positioned latitudinally, right? So you see, and then if we look through the neck, so that's like a collection, that's a selection of latitudes. Within that latitude, they are not very stable. They are too far shifted to the back and so on. You want to have a lot more depth and a lot more of those suction cups within them. But as the opening of the depth, this is really a great image for you to keep in mind. And then, of course, I will bring you to the extremes here, where you would see the things which go wrong, right? So you see here, you see the opposite situation. So here you can see the shoulder girdle, which is divided, and why you see the separate shoulder blades, because this is where you can see just the clavicles. And then this is the kid who is actually very, very different, and he is really very informative because it gives you another important transition which you want to observe. So you see, here we move into the next less obvious and quite tricky component. So which is also very, very important. So you see here, as we went through this drawing, right? So you see the shoulder, you can see the shape of their trapezius. So we discussed the attachment of the trapezius that sits here, right? We kind of covered this part as the worst, right? So you see if those edges are being used, right? And as it's being connected to the clavicles. But we haven't discussed one more important thing. This entire diamond shape or the rhombus thing, right? So you see how deep is this thing? What is the depth of this entire item? So because again, if we continue our dorsal exploration, the skin and the fascia of the skin, that's another part of this suction process. So you have to see this integration of the trapezius. And this is what we're really seeing as another clear illustration of how the whole thing works. So this is the channel who doesn't have the shoulder blades. They are very, very unstable. But as the sign indicating the emerging depth of the of the trapezius, this is very, very important. So that is showing you that the whole process can go through different avenues depending on what kind of tissue disposition your channel has. In some cases, it's very, very kind of boring. It starts with the merging of the acromion to the shoulder, to the clavicle, and they are stitching together, and the gradual shift of the curtain of the trapezius towards the shoulder blades. In other cases, you see the fast emergence of the neck, and the shoulder blades, they just shift downwards into this into their natural latitude. And in some cases, like in this boy, what you're seeing here, you're seeing that it's the depth of this rhombus which emerges first. So it's a skin connection, the skin suction that is being activated first. But of course, what you want all of those factors to start working for you. And what I believe is that seeing those visually helps you to kind of to get the better sense of what you're observing in your child when you're doing this home tests and so on. And this is the example which I kind of keep in special regard, because this is the example of everything that could go wrong, right? So you see, this is the child who's kind of had intensive classic crawling training, right? So you see like very intense, like multiple years of Doman and crawling, and you see what happens there as the classic scenario. So you can see this is the child who loses everything related to the depth. The kid is quite big. The kid, like had all sorts of like, he's quite big, sizable and so on. So originally has a reasonable tissue disposition. But look at that. So when you look at the connection between the clavicle and the shoulder blade, what do you see? You see the big hole, right? Very visible. The second thing, when you look at the position of the shoulder blades, where are they? Are they positioned dorsally? No, they are positioned all the way laterally. And of course, the most impressively here, when you look at the trapezius, where do you see trapezius being attached? The entire trapezius being attached to the clavicle. And then when we look at the actual structure of the trapezius, where are the main connections? The main connections are the ones that are following this edge, right? So you see it's following the string. So it's as much shifted to the string as possible. And then you have everything missing. The spine is missing, the depth of the rhombus is missing, the neck is missing, the shoulder blade depth is missing, everything is missing. So this is the kid who's had, I know, hundreds, thousands of hours of training, so who's been turned into the kind of crawling machine by fusing everything, fusing the arms, fusing everything laterally. So this is as anti-human as it could be. Humans are dorsal, right? So you see animals are lateral. So you see, and this is really the important thing to understand. That's not what you want to develop in your child, even though when the child is small, this kind of fusion going for the clavicle, going for the, the string of the trapezius and going for the lateralization of the shoulder blade, that can provide you with some form of the mobility, but that has zero potential for the future. And also, like when you study the the trapezius like this, so I want you to always keep in mind this universal plan. It will probably take you some time to process it, right? So it's like it's messy, but I'm kind of getting back to this plan of the nuchal ligament. So here is the simpler picture, right? So you see that's a simpler picture in the context of the head. So we talked about multiple times. That's a zoom. So what do you see in this zoom? You see several important things, right? You see the very special role of this line, right? So you see this line is very, very special. And by the way, we have a transcript, or we have a recording of like my half an hour explanation of this somewhere in Dropbox, so we can send the link in one of our next communications. So then you have here, you have the second class of the connections, which are very specifically human, which are happening here, right? So those expanding lines there. Then you have the third class here, which is, see, these are the lines which are going like that. And then you have the fourth class, that would be the lines which are more or less like becoming parallel to the spine. So these are the four classes of things, and everything that you see, you want to keep them in mind. And particularly human are these ones, the ones that kind of run along the spine, and this sort of inverted triangle that allows to deal with flexion. So, and why is it so important? Because you can compare this to animals. Ba-bam, here they are, right? So here are the animals, the horse and the ox. And when you look at the horse and the ox, what do you see? These guys do not have those triangles, they have these leading parts. And they even have their names. The string and those inclined triangles, they have their names. Funicular part and lamellar part. So the thing is that these guys are also able to lift their heads, but that's not what you want for your channel. You want that because they can't control that flexion. They don't have those specific lines which follow parallel to the spine, which are the human properties, and they don't have this inverted triangle there. But once you remember these names, funicular part and lamellar part, right? So lamellar part. So then you would understand what I was trying to show you with this image here, right? So you see, what does this guy have? This boy has only the funicular part of the trapezius. Why? Because it's a string. It's like a bass guitar string, which is super powerful. And then, you know, for the kids who actually lift their heads in this unnatural way, you see the kids with this kind of horse necks as well. So super powerful, you know, funicular parts like a single string. But the point is that humans don't work this way. So what you actually want in this situation, you want the exact opposite. You want to have it central. You want to have it spread. You want to have it centralized and deepened, not shifted to the periphery as much as possible. So I think that that's kind of valuable for you to see these ideas so that you can understand better what you don't want and what you potentially want. Of course, I am trying to do this rapidly, right? So it's like within this 40 minutes or 50 minutes just to kind of, you know, pound those things on you. But I sort of expect you to be able to rewatch the webinars. And I hope that the main message of this is actually for you when you will be filming your channel, when you will be listening to, you know, my, you know, feedback or reviews and so on, so that you will actually have this webinar in mind, this description in mind, so that we don't have to kind of start from scratch, right? So that you understand this basic narratives, what's good and what's bad. Because, you know, once you understand that you want there, you know, when it comes to the total thing, that you want the opposite of this boy, right? So you see, when he is disconnected, you want the connection, right? You want the link to be as strong as possible. When he's de-spined, you want your channel to be as much re-spined as possible. When he is as lateral as possible, you want your shoulder blade to be as dorsal as possible, right? As much as the back, you know. So and so on and so forth. When he's, you know, when his trapezius is funicularized, you want it to be first lameralized and then, you know, to turn into the one which would have this nuchal ligament property. So this is, again, not a difficult image to have, I hope, so that you can get this idea, so that you will start seeing through. So that's the first part of my conversation. And if you have any questions, well, immediate questions there, so then, of course, I would be, you know, happy, or if you want some immediate comments, I would be happy to add them right now. Otherwise, I will move to another, you know, interesting part that I was thinking about, you know, bringing in today. Okay, so that's obviously the worst example here, right? So you see, this is where you see this extreme instability of the shoulder blades, right? And you see, this is not dorsalization, right? So you see, these are the shoulder blades which just slide all the way to the neck and which do not have and this is like they're not integrated with the back at all. They are detached. So that's why we talk about the skin depth, which we were seeing in this boy. So you see, having this depth evolution is very, very important. So now I have even more ambitious goal to show you some things about the hand and the elbow, if possible. So if you remember from my previous conversation about the foot, right? So you see what I was highlighting there. So when we were looking at the observations of the ankle, heel, and the foot, right? So you see we were discussing this relationship, right? So you see this kind of parallelogram type of the merge that different parts have to each other, right? So you see if we do the circular rotation around, the cylinder-like torsion around the forearm, about the upper arm and about the arm, then they would meet at this angle, right? So you see that will be like 45 in respect to each other. So that 45 way of meeting, that's the primary layout of everything that of the body map. To maybe throw in these basic ideas, reminding you what torsion is, right? So torsion is this thing, twisting of a rod or a beam as a result of an applied torque. So, and when you do this, you see it comes with different angles, right? So you see at one side you've got a bigger cheese cut, and on the other side you've got a smaller one. So you see, if you look at this, the whole thing distorts. So it's kind of converts in a sort of from a cylinder to the parallelogram. And the result of this looks like that. So torsion is the most important thing that we have to keep in mind, because out of all in conversions of the external forces into the internal forces, torsion is the one that creates the greatest concentrations of loads, right? So you see, and that's the key point. The only thing that the body cares about that there would be no local concentrations of loads, because they are completely destructive. So that means that when we discuss anything about the leg, about the arm, and about even the torso, but the leg and the arm are easier to understand, we have to first think in terms of the cross section. See, the same way as you were looking at this beam, right? You are looking at this beam and thinking at the cross section, what happens if you rotate it, and if you take two beams and make them meet, how would they meet with each other? How would you avoid the local concentration of forces, and how would you avoid the destruction? And here is the answer. When it comes to their control of the torsion, the most important part is the perimeter. It's the perimeter that has the disproportional value in controlling the torsion. So it's the perimeter that holds, because because of what you have seen in the previous picture of the takeout angle. So that's why, what kind of image does it bring to you? That brings you the image that the most important part in controlling the torsion is the one that goes from the skin inwards, skin fat component. And this is a great older picture of the leg, which actually highlights how large is the fat component there. So it's the skin map that leads, not the muscle map, right? And this is really the most difficult thing to get through. Because when we start talking about the skin map and how it slides and how it kind of, we know which wrinkles matter and which don't, and how they meet to each other, and so on and so on, it's something very like new. You have to think about them. You don't have any kind of good previous reference and so on. Because you see, when I show you the image of the muscle man, even as unrealistic as this, say, you know, I've seen this millions of times. You know, when somebody when I would start my conversation about the arms, showing you the components. You see, when I would start showing you things like this, I say, oh, look, I've seen this many times. These are good old familiar bones. You might not know their names and so on, but this is how you tend to, you know, to think. You know, we start with the bones, then we add the muscles, and then we kind of start going all around and try to understand what's going on. But the reality is different. The reality, you have to count from the skin. So, and that's the thing to understand. So that actually the first point is not about the action of the fingers and so on and so on. It's about how controllable are those twists. So, and that's why I'm bringing those pictures to your attention. You see, the good evolution of the hand comes with this very, very clear meet between the forearm and the upper arm. Muscles are embedded into this skin fat mode. So what does it mean? Embedded, they are implanted there, right? So in other words, your map of the muscles follows the map of those cross sections. So when we think about the whole thing, we have to think about the cross sections. So muscles, bones, and so on, they are inserted into the thing. So that's a big change of the perspective. So you have to think this way. And once you start thinking this way, then the next point, of course, will be discussion of the rotations, because they are the representations of torsions. But now look at this beauty. I mean, this is beautiful, because underneath, you see, skin is has multiple maps to it. So this is the first primary map. And of course, this is I'm showing on the medial side, right? So the same, the opposite would be the chicken wing that you would look at at the lateral side. But here, you see, that's the first map. But underneath that map, what do you have? You have the next map. And this next map is now, that's going to be the next point when you would have real cylinders, one cylinder and the other cylinder. And then your elbow is this thing. That's your elbow, right? So you see, this is your true elbow, this squarish thing. So in order to get one cylinder and another cylinder, you have to put the, you know, this extra square, extra box, which would make them meet to each other. So that's how the skin kind of comes out and has to have all these maps and distinction to finally allow the actual movement into the joint. So this part of the map is also something for you to see and keep in mind as the thing which is to be considered later. And now I'm looking at it from the other side, right? So you see, and here we now start looking at the way how this cross section of the leg gets inserted as a tube into the arm. So, and here you can see all these important things. The skin folds, these rims, which are actually making the outer facets of the joint. So, and you've seen this already on the elbow, oh, sorry, on the knee, but this is even, you know, like, but that's the part that you have to see here. And when we get back to this picture, now you will start thinking about this picture better, right? Because here you will start seeing these cross sections, right? You will start seeing the first, you know, the cylinders. Those cylinders, they have to meet at the, you know, at those crisscrosses and the cross. And then there has to be this additional sector here, which would actually meet the way how the entire forearm is being inserted into the entire arm. So that's how the thing works. So these are the images that you want to learn from the pictures of the other kids and understand that in order for you to have the opening, that has to change. See, for example, this kid has a very good presence on the medial side, but doesn't have a very good presence on the lateral side. So this primary plan is not there. So that's why when I try to open it, it is blocked. See, if I were to look at it from a standard perspective, I would say, oh, this is the shortening of the brachioradialis muscle. So that would be this kind of classic picture here. See, brachioradialis, it bridges over. So if it bridges over like this, then you can't extend the arm. So by standard perspective, you need to fight with it, you need to try to extend it, and so on and so forth. But we see that this part is related to this, so that it's not enough circumference. The total cross section is not sufficient yet. The skin map hasn't organized enough yet. So that's again the central message there. So next thing I want to highlight. Now we're looking at the transition at the wrist. And here, as we look at the transition at the wrist, so this is also a very good view. So this view shows us two things. So you see what I'm pointing out here. I'm pointing out this thing that when the child experiences problem, then you have the double gluing. You have the gluing that goes across, and then you have the gluing that goes along. That's why you have with the gluing along, you have the whole thing very narrow, the strings. And when for the gluing that goes across, this is where you observe those kind of reddish fusions which are happening at the wrist. So that's a typical scenario. So when we look at the hand which is spastic, the first point for us is to look on the inner side of it and understand what happens on the glued side. So that's the number one thing to keep in mind. So let's move on. See, this is what I'm pointing out on my own hand. So what kind of gluings are happening and what the transitions that you actually want to have. So you want to have those openings, those bands, which are going to go across. And then, of course, the widening, which is going to go along. So, and that's why when we use that and look at this hand here, what am I evaluating? I'm evaluating two things. Visibility, all right, Manu? So, see, I'm evaluating 2 points. How much is it glued horizontally, and how much is it glued longitudinal, right? So these are the two gluings that we are observing there. And this gluing, which is longitudinal, it's more within the tendons and ligaments, within that sheath. We're going to look at it. But this gluing, which goes across, is the one which relates more to the skin map. So that's the fusion within the skin. And that's the one which is primary. So, by the way, that's one of the kind of big reasons that we see additional success with the usage of the fascia gel as the part of the, unfusing this type of the glued areas. So both horizontal and the longitudinals alike. But this is what I want you to see. So that's a good transition here. You see, look, it has to be displaceable. You have to be able to see the separate strings there. And you have to be able to play with it, right? So you see, and at the same time, the actual palm shouldn't be dragged and fused. You see, when I'm moving it, the palm is not moving. So that's the evolution of this hand. That's a plus. This is a positive evolution. Of course, it's far from being open, and you can see that the main line here is not going into the middle. See, the main line, as you can observe it, it's shifted more to the side rather than running through the middle. So these things are still, of course, they are to be improved, but that is going to come through the cross section. So that's, and you see here, that's another exploration. Now I'm trying to split them by putting the finger in between. So that's the evolution of the part that happens with the palm. But this is a great view. See, this is the one that shows you the strings. See, that's a string. That's a string of a tendon. If we look at it here, see, that's overall, that's a cross section of the palm. So it has to unlock first. But this part that you see here, right? So you see this little thing, the carpal tunnel itself. In the carpal tunnel, you have this whole collection of tendons and ligaments. And once the things get better, they start emerging. So they emerge to the surface. So, and that's how you can have a situation when it looks worse, meaning that it was sort of smoother, but then as the area changes, then you start seeing those individual strings. So that's the important kind of transition which we have to pay attention to and understand how this thing evolves and changes. So you see, that's the string, but then this string has to be integrated into the circumferential thickness. So we always have to keep in mind this circumferential thickness, the skin fat part as the leading one there. And now let's move on further back to the video, and I'll try to illustrate some other points there. So now we are looking at the hand transformation, which is very, very typical, and which a lot of you, especially for the children with the quadriplegic or even hemiplegic hands, when they're very collapsed, a lot of you are going to see. So it's an important thing to understand. So first point that you observe, right? So is this line from the tip to the cleft, right? We talked about tip to cleft when it was the heel. We talked about the heel, the tip to cleft when it was the knee. We are bringing this conversation back. So now it's the opposite, right? So you see here, we've got the cleft of the elbow and the cleft of the wrist. And we have the tip of the wrist with the tip of the elbow, right? So you see those things, they are kind of connected with each other. So when we talk about the improvement of your child's condition, we want to see all of those pairs changing. The cleft of the elbow with the cleft of the wrist, the tip of the wrist with the tip of the elbow. So these things I want you to see together, and I want you also to see them in that line, that in first place, this is the control of torsion. The same thing as we have seen for the elbows, right? So you see, that's a control of the torsion. Torsion is the primary thing. So that's the image number one when you're looking at this thing. It's going to be important just one step later. The second thing that you're seeing here is that now I'm trying to test the extension of the wrist, right? I'm trying to test the extension of the wrist by using this pivotal action, right? So you see, I'm trying to do this movement, right? So like following this arc. So which implies that we would have some axis within the wrist and then the angular change of the wrist position. When I do this, is this the easiest movement or is it the most difficult movement? The answer, of course, that's the most difficult movement. To test the opening, the extension of the wrist like this via this grip is the most difficult. Why? Because as I'm doing it, I'm favoring the reaction of the muscles which are doing their like shortest bridge. The shortest bridge at the bottom, I'm activating them first. I'm not activating the rest of this triangle. I'm not activating the pivots there. I'm actually activating their skin gluings and their bridges which are happening over the wrist. So, and that's a very interesting point. It's already been through a number of families that I've heard. Oh, like once we started the Vibra thing here, the arm kind of looks more alive, but at the same time, like it's warmer and so on and so on, and the fingers, but it looks that he is like more flexed in his wrist, because when we try to open it, it doesn't work so well. So with this kid, I'm showing this very clearly, what's the trick here and what is their actual difference. See, I'm trying to show this. This is exactly the same thing with this channel, right? So you see, and when I'm trying to open it up like that, when I'm trying to do this movement, when I'm trying to open it with this move, it's not working. It's restricted. Because before you had all sorts of kind of disconnects, fusion. So you see, like people were fighting with those, like they were stretching, doing all sorts of like rubbish to those things. So it's like distorting. Now we see the clean appearance of this kind of the cleft skin. And if I try to do this, it's not working very well. But you see what's happening later. I am starting to do the move from the top, right? Because this is now what I'm doing here. I'm actually doing this move from, I was doing this move from the top. So I would be testing it not from here, right? So you see this is restricted. I would be doing the application from the top, from the tip, not from the cleft, but from the tip. See, this one is not working. This one is not working. See, this is their application from the cleft, not working. See, he is resisting and so on. And that might sound like it's more difficult for us to open the hand. But now I'm doing the next move. See, now I'm shifting my grip to the tip. Instead of the cleft, trying to raise it from the cleft, I'm moving my load to the tip. And what we are seeing, suddenly we are seeing the level of extension of the wrist that we have never seen before. So before, this thing was fused, merged, whatever word you say. So it was kind of organically, structurally, and so on, fused and merged. So what we are doing here, we are actually demerging it, and that's why the joint itself is starting to change. But this now the sequence matters. See, if I load the tip before, when it was fused, whether you're trying to move it from the bottom or from the top, it didn't matter. It would be equally fused. But now, once it's unlocking, you can experience this, that it's a dramatic difference between the way how the wrist responds when I press from the top, coming from the tip side, or when I try to get it from the cleft side. By the way, the same is true for the elbow, right? Opening like this against the cleft, you would find the most of resistance. If you want to see the evolution, you have to start from the tip side. It's the same thing which is true for the knees and hamstrings. You know, I hear from some people these things from time to time. Oh, you know, like it looks that the leg is thicker, but we are not sure whether the hamstrings are getting better. The same thing. If you start applying the load from the knee, you're going to see the difference. Whether it's so, that's the universal rule. When we are experiencing the transformation of this type of the cross-sectional connections, there is a big difference whether the load, the test load, is coming from the tip or whether it comes from the cleft. So, and that's also the very fact that that load, that this difference is so significant, is the part that is showing you how important those things are. But now in the next video, I'm going to discuss, see, here it's better and better and better, right? See, I'm always bringing it almost straight. So the mother, when she saw that, she was like opening her mouth, because, you know, this is the kid who is like in his 20s and they've been doing those things, you know, they've been doing some sort of rehabilitation for him for, you know, years, right? So, and that is very, very spectacular how you can see this transition. Now, but here I start the conversation about this, you know, like pointing out the importance of the change, because what happened, and this is, I want you to be very, very alert to this, right? So you see that this is the change of the tip. You see, it's the skin on the slippery side, on the tip, which has changed, also allowing this dramatic improvement of mobility, not only the depth. And you see here, what we're observing, the formation of those high quality wrinkles and this ability to get the grips. So again, the skin factor being, you know, being essential. And by the way, this kid, you know, I would continue to emphasize that the usage of the fascia gel here has been a huge benefit, which contributed to the point of the skin grip over here. So as the skin grip improved, the ability, my ability to do the total like loading and the tip to cleft change has improved dramatically. So, and that's a better hand, that's his right. And then we'll see, I'm showing his left hand, which is poor. And what you're seeing here, you're seeing that the skin connections on the cleft or on the tip side, they're also less articulate. So they're more slippery, they're less, you know, they're less connected, they're less thick, and so on. And probably I should show one more thing here, which also made me completely fascinated there in this particular boy, is this. So this is the conversation about the difference between about the pronation and supination. See here, I'm pointing out this extreme pronation. So, and I'm trying to illustrate here that in his case, the relationship between the radius and the ulnar, so this membrane that connects them is so unstable, then they just collapse into each other. And then I'm pointing out here the gap between them, and I'm trying to measure it with my fingers. See, here it's wider. It opens. And this way it closes. Yeah, so here I'm showing how it closes. So it's 2 fingers. And then here, when it opens, it's full 3 fingers. But the most amazing thing that I found in this boy was the relationship between the radius ulnar and the grip at the skin. So it's, I mean, look, this is very, I mean, let me even make it slightly slower. I mean, this is absolutely incredible thing, like amazing. See, I'm pressing here. See, I'm pressing in the two sides and the hand responds. So that's, one of those things which I had so much trouble like figuring out before. Because here what you see is this amazing cross section. See, that's a cross section of the forearm. See, here we've got the bone, right? One bone, the membrane in between them, and the other bone. But when you look at this like this, what do you see? Fat. And then you see these lines, right? So you see this white line over here. It's a membrane that surrounds the whole thing. And this membrane, it's huge, because when you deliver the compression from the outside, your central question here is how good is the grip between the skin, fat, and the bones at the outer perimeter. Because if you try to do it with your chain, you'll see that it's super slippery. It doesn't grip. So in that sense, the emergence of that line is a huge factor. It's a first membrane that divides the outer skin and the inner context. So then once you got this grip, that brings a huge change into the relationship between the radius and the ulnar and to the connection of the membrane in between. So again, I'm able, like those things in the recent maybe year, they started changing, I don't know, 5 times faster than before. So, the examples here, so they are consistent, the Vibra tools users for the radius ulnar split, and, like consistent ABR gel users. So seeing the grip at the skin improving so much and how much kind of benefit it brings to unlocking the muscles, it's absolutely amazing. So in that sense, I mean, this is from September, those filmings. I'm still kind of digesting myself, but these are the things which I kind of bump into regularly, and these are actually discoveries, right? So you see, these things, you're not going to find them in any sort of textbook or whatever. So in that sense, I guess I'm already running over 1.5 hours, and I am still having, lots of things to show, but probably I have to start folding the tent in that sense, right? And just wanted to highlight the fact is that, okay, when we discuss the elbow, the critical part is the development of this, the development of the supination. That's a critical part because it comes together with this fold, but with the medial fold. But you see, when the channel goes into the supination, the hand still has to open, right? So that's one of the bigger things to remember. And also, this is a spectacular view, which is pointing out what is the evolution of the fingers, right? So you see, because for the evolution of the fingers, you need to have these transitions, the transitions which would come with the visibility of the tendons, but at the same time, what you're going to see there, you're going to see the depth of the palm to establish properly. So, I'm maybe trying to do too much today because the topic of today is a bit overly ambitious, and maybe, we will need to repeat this at some future following the questions from you. But I just want to maybe as a summary bring some of those things that you see when it comes to the hands and arms. It's really, really interesting. It's really, really like lots of things are being packed over there. But in order for you to not to get lost into this picture, right? So you see, let's remember just sort of few basic ideas. Right? Tip to cleft, right? So you see, this is what I want you to see all the time, right? I want you to see this relationship of the tips and clefts. So whenever you meet the cleft, So at the cleft, you're going to see bridges. Cleft is going to be fused, merged. So, and usually it's double, triple, and more merges. And the skin could get completely collapsed there. So it's the skin that's the factor that you have to demerge first. As you demerge it, the tendons, as the deeper levels, they would appear, but this is good for you. So, and the evolution of mobility could only be tested from tip to cleft. So at the tip, what we're usually experiencing is the super slipperiness, right? So you see if the cleft merges, the tip slides. When it comes to the elbow, the same story, right? The tip, which is on the other side, right? It merges, the cleft, sorry, it slides, the cleft, it all merges. So even if you remember this simple thing, that's going to be very helpful. And of course, you know, the next thing that you would want to ask there, right, is the relationship that goes further into the hands, right? So you see, and in the hands, we still would see the double points there. So where you can experience the extension of that sliding and the clefts at the actual digits, right? And then you would see the tips here on this side, right? So that's a very useful image for you to keep. So that's from the second, or like from the third part of our conversation. So when we get back to the second part of our conversation, I want you to remember this emphasis on the supination. And I want you to remember the key role of the folds at the level of the cleft, right? The cylinder, the anti-torsion thing, right? So that was the second part of our conversation. And getting back to the beginning, we started with the discussion about the depth. So please remember this cross section that you want to develop the dorsal depth, right? And then, of course, this image is very, very powerful because it's illustrating very, very well. So the disruption between the clavicle and the shoulder blade as the key challenge that you need to overcome. Because if the person only connects the head, connects to the clavicle, so that means that you are missing the posterior half of the body. So that means that you don't have the depth and you are in serious trouble. So, and vice versa, once the depth emerges, no matter what kind of transitions are happening along the lines, you know, like whether it's gets immediately better control of the arms or poor control and so on. So you know that the things are on a good rise and a good way. So probably I managed to deliver like 60–70% of what I've sort of ambitiously planned, but that's already been overly ambitious. So I hope that I didn't overload you too much, but you know, look, you're going to have the recording of this, and that's something which is going to be available for you to rewatch further. And again, this is very, very practical, I believe, because I try to pack it with the examples that you can visually refer and compare to your own channel. So I think that with that, we're going to say goodbye to the viewers in Facebook and today and later. And you know, as always, if you feel that there's a like information there that helps you to understand the development of the child with disabilities, with cerebral palsy, with genetic cases and so on, so you know, please share it with the others, and you know, that more people can benefit from better understanding rather than being confused with their types of stretching, contraptions, and all the other, you know, devices. All right, so we'll wave goodbye for now over question and answer section.